gunshot cracked through the Brooklyn night like thunder, and Virginia Hill didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway of the Flamingo Hotel, her red dress clinging to her curves, watching as Benjamin Siegel stumbled backward into the velvet curtains. Blood bloomed across his white shirt like a crimson flower, and in that moment, she knew her life would never be the same. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to Bugsy. Not to the man who had promised her the world wrapped in diamond bracelets and whispered threats. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Virginia Hill became the most dangerous woman in organized crime, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to when she was just a girl from Alabama with nothing but ambition and a face that could launch 1,000 illegal operations. Virginia Hill was born in 1916 in Lipscomb, Alabama, the youngest of 10 children in a family so poor that dinner was often nothing more than hope and yesterday's cornbread. Her father was a horse trader who drank more than he earned, and her mother was a woman worn thin by poverty and too many pregnancies. By the time Virginia was 8 years old, she had learned that beauty was currency, and she was rich in the only way that mattered in a world that devoured the weak. She ran away from home at 17, her belongings stuffed into a cardboard suitcase held together with twine and determination. Chicago called to her like a siren song, promising lights and music and men with money in their pockets. The year was 1933, and the city was drowning in bootleg whiskey and blood. Al Capone's empire was crumbling, but the infrastructure he'd built, the network of speakeasies and protection rackets and political corruption, that was eternal. New men were rising to fill the vacuum, and Virginia Hill intended to rise right alongside them. She got a job as a waitress at the San Carlo Italian Village, a restaurant on the north side that served more than just pasta. In the back rooms, deals were made that shaped the city's future. Money changed hands. Lives were bought and sold, and Virginia watched it all with eyes that missed nothing. It was there, on a freezing February night in 1934, that she first met Joe Epstein. He walked in like he owned the place, which in a way he did. Joe Epstein was an accountant for the Chicago outfit, a man who could make millions disappear into thin air and make the taxman smile while doing it. He was short, balding, and 20 years older than Virginia, but he had something she wanted. Power. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, and Virginia felt electricity shoot down her spine. She'd felt desire before, felt the pull of attraction, but this was different. This was recognition. Joe saw her, really saw her, not as a pretty waitress but as something more. Something dangerous. He approached her table with a confidence that came from never having been told no. "What's your name, sweetheart?" His voice was rough, like gravel mixed with honey. "Virginia," she said, meeting his gaze without blinking. "Virginia Hill. You from around here, Virginia Hill? Does it matter?" She tilted her head, letting her dark hair fall across one shoulder. "I'm here now." Joe laughed, a sound that came from deep in his belly. "I like you. You got fire. Most girls in this joint, they're scared of their own shadows. But not you." "I'm not scared of anything," Virginia said, and in that moment, she believed it. Joe Epstein became her teacher, her mentor, and eventually her lover. He taught her the business, showed her how money moved through the underworld like water through pipes. She learned to count cards, to read men's tells, to spot a rat before he could open his mouth. But more than that, she learned how to use what she had to get what she wanted. Their affair was passionate and volatile. Joe was married, which meant their meetings were stolen moments in hotel rooms and the back seats of expensive cars. Virginia didn't care about his wife, a mousy woman who stayed home and pretended not to know where her husband spent his nights. She cared about the jewelry Joe bought her, the apartments he rented for her, the introductions he made. One night, after they'd made love in a suite at the Palmer House, Joe lit a cigar and said, "I'm sending you to New York. There's people there you need to meet. People who can use a girl like you." Virginia sat up, the silk sheet falling away from her body. "What kind of people?" "The kind that run things." Joe exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "You're wasted in Chicago, doll. You're smart, you're beautiful, and you're ruthless. That's a rare combination. In New York, you could be somebody." "I'm already somebody," Virginia said, but her heart was racing. New York. The big time. Not like this. In New York, you could have it all. He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. But you gotta be careful. These guys, they're not like the Chicago boys. They're smoother, more sophisticated, but they're just as deadly. More so, maybe, because you won't see it coming. Virginia moved to New York in the spring of 1935, and the city swallowed her whole. Joe set her up in an apartment on the Upper West Side and introduced her to the right people. She became a courier for the mob, carrying messages and money between New York and Chicago, between bosses who couldn't be seen talking to each other. It was dangerous work, but Virginia thrived on danger. She met them all. Lucky Luciano, the man who'd reorganized crime in America along corporate lines. Meyer Lansky, the financial genius who'd turned the mob into a multimillion-dollar enterprise. Frank Costello, the political fixer who had judges and senators in his pocket. And through it all, Virginia smiled and flirted and remembered everything she saw and heard. But it was Benjamin Siegel who changed everything. They met at a party at the Waldorf Astoria in 1936. Virginia was there on the arm of a minor racketeer, a man whose name she'd forget by morning. But Bugsy Siegel, she would remember him forever. He was beautiful. There was no other word for it. Tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and dark hair slicked back with pomade. He wore a tuxedo like it was a second skin, and when he smiled, women forgot their own names. He was also, Virginia knew, one of the most dangerous men in America. A killer who'd earned his nickname by being absolutely crazy when provoked. Their eyes locked across the ballroom, and Virginia felt her stomach flip. This was different from what she'd felt with Joe Epstein. This was hunger. This was need. Bugsy made his way through the crowd toward her, ignoring everyone else. When he reached her, he didn't say hello. He said, "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Virginia let him lead her onto the floor, his hand hot against the small of her back. They moved together like they'd been dancing their whole lives, their bodies in perfect sync. "I've heard about you," Bugsy said, his mouth close to her ear. "The girl from Alabama who's got Chicago and New York eating out of her hand. Believe everything you hear?" Virginia asked, looking up at him through her lashes. "Only the good stuff." His grip on her waist tightened. "You're beautiful, but you already know that. What you might not know is that you're also smart, and that's more dangerous." "Dangerous to who?" "To everyone. To me." He spun her out and pulled her back in, and Virginia felt her breath catch. "I like dangerous women. They're the only ones worth knowing." Their affair began that night and burned like a wildfire for the next decade. It was passionate and destructive and all-consuming. Bugsy was married to Esta, a woman he'd met when they were teenagers, but he made no secret of his relationship with Virginia. He showered her with gifts, fur coats and diamond necklaces and cars with her name on the registration. He took her to clubs where they danced until dawn, to restaurants where the waiters knew to bring them the best table without asking. But Bugsy was also violent and paranoid and obsessed with respect. He once beat a man unconscious for looking at Virginia the wrong way. Another time, he put a gun to her head during an argument, his finger trembling on the trigger, before breaking down in tears and begging her forgiveness. "I love you," he'd sob, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you so much it's killing me. Don't ever leave me, Virginia. Promise me you'll never leave." And she'd promise, because what else could she do? She loved him too, loved him with a desperation that terrified her. Bugsy was the first man who'd ever made her feel like she wasn't in control, and that loss of control was both thrilling and horrifying. Their relationship played out against the backdrop of the mob's expansion into new territories. Bugsy had a vision, a crazy dream that everyone thought would fail. He wanted to build a casino in the middle of the Nevada desert, in a nothing town called Las Vegas. He called it the Flamingo, after Virginia's long legs and the way she stood on one foot when she was thinking. "It's going to be paradise," he told her one night, his eyes shining with manic energy. "A palace in the desert. The biggest, most beautiful casino anyone's ever seen. We're going to be rich, baby. Richer than you can imagine." Virginia wanted to believe him. She helped him, using her connections to funnel money from Chicago and New York to finance the construction. But the project was plagued with problems from the start. Construction costs spiraled out of control. Contractors stole supplies and sold them on the black market. The opening kept getting delayed. And the mob bosses who'd fronted the money were getting nervous. Meyer Lansky called her to New York in the fall of 1946. She met him at a restaurant in Little Italy, a place where the pasta was homemade and the conversations were deadly. "Sit down, Virginia," Meyer said, his voice calm and measured. He was a small man, almost delicate, but Virginia knew better than to underestimate him. Meyer Lansky was the most dangerous man in America, precisely because he didn't look dangerous. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed. "What's this about, Meyer?" "You know what it's about. Ben's casino. The Flamingo." Meyer leaned back in his chair. "The numbers don't add up, Virginia. We've put in $6 million, and the place still isn't finished." "Where's the money going?" "Construction costs," Virginia said smoothly. "You know how it is in the desert. Everything's more expensive. Labor, materials, transportation. Is that what Ben tells you?" Meyer's eyes were cold. "Or is he skimming? Is he taking our money and putting it in his pocket?" "Ben wouldn't do that." But even as she said it, Virginia felt doubt creeping in. She'd seen the receipts, seen the invoices that didn't quite add up. She'd asked Bugsy about it, and he'd exploded, accusing her of not trusting him, of being just like everyone else. "Ben's losing it," Meyer said flatly. "You know it, I know it. He's always been crazy, but now he's crazy and desperate. That's a bad combination. The commission is losing patience, Virginia. If that casino doesn't open soon, and if it doesn't make money, there's going to be consequences." Virginia's blood ran cold. "What kind of consequences?" Meyer didn't answer. He didn't have to. In the mob, there was only one kind of consequence for stealing and failure. She flew back to Los Angeles that night, her mind racing. She had to warn Bugsy, had to make him understand how serious this was. But when she got to their house in Beverly Hills, she found him in his office, surrounded by blueprints and bottles of pills for his headaches. "Bugsy, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Not now, Virginia. I'm busy. This can't wait. Meyer called me in. He thinks you're skimming from the Flamingo budget." Bugsy's face went white, then red. He stood up so fast his chair fell over. "He said that? That little kike said I'm stealing from him? Don't." Virginia held up her hand. "Don't make this worse. Just tell me the truth. Are you skimming? What does it matter?" Bugsy shouted. "That casino is mine. I'm building it. They wouldn't even have the vision for something like this if it wasn't for me. So what if I take a little off the top? I've earned it." Virginia felt her heart sink. "Oh, Bugsy, what have you done?" "I've done what I had to do." He grabbed her arms, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're supposed to be on my side, Virginia. You're supposed to support me." "I am on your side," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "But you're going to get yourself killed. You know the rules. You can't steal from the commission. They'll kill you, Bugsy. They'll kill you, and they won't think twice about it." He let go of her and turned away, running his hands through his hair. "Then what am I supposed to do? The casino's almost done. Once it opens, once they see what I've built, they'll forget all about the money. They'll see that I was right all along." But the Flamingo's opening on December 26, 1946, was a disaster. A rainstorm kept the Hollywood stars away. The casino lost money, and the mob bosses who'd flown in to see their investment were not impressed. Virginia watched Bugsy charm and cajole and promise, watched him sweat through his tuxedo as he tried to convince them that everything would be fine. But she could see it in their eyes. They'd already made their decision. She tried to get him to run. "We can go to Mexico," she begged him one night after the casino had closed for renovations. "We can disappear. Start over somewhere they'll never find us." "I'm not running," Bugsy said, his jaw set. "I'm not a coward. This is my casino, my dream. I'm seeing it through. Your dream is going to get you killed. Then I'll die for it." He grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Don't you understand, Virginia? This is all I have. This casino, this vision, it's my legacy. Without it, I'm nothing. I'm just another thug from the Lower East Side. But with it, I'm immortal." Virginia left Los Angeles in March 1947. She told herself it was temporary, that she was just going to Paris to clear her head. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was running. She was saving herself because Bugsy wouldn't save himself. She was in Paris when she got the call. It was June 20th, 1947, and she was having breakfast at a cafe near the Champs-Élysées when the waiter brought her a telephone. "Virginia Hill?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "Yes. I thought you should know. Ben Siegel was killed last night. Shot in the living room of his house in Beverly Hills." The phone slipped from her hand and clattered on the table. The cafe spun around her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't feel anything but a vast, yawning emptiness. Bugsy was dead. The man she'd loved, the man she'd built an empire with, was gone. Shot through the eye while reading a newspaper, killed by people he'd considered friends. Virginia didn't go to the funeral. She couldn't bear it. Instead, she stayed in Europe, moving from city to city, trying to outrun her grief and her guilt. She'd left him. When he'd needed her most, she'd saved herself and left him to die. But the story doesn't end there. Virginia Hill lived for another 19 years, a shadow of the woman she'd been. She married a ski instructor in Austria, had a son, tried to build a normal life. But the past wouldn't let her go. The IRS hounded her for taxes on money she couldn't explain. Journalists tracked her down, demanding to know about her life with the mob. And every night, when she closed her eyes, she saw Bugsy's face. On March 24, 1966, Virginia Hill walked into the mountains near Salzburg in a snowstorm. They found her body days later, frozen in the snow. The official verdict was suicide, though some said it was an accident. But those who knew her, who understood what she'd lost, knew the truth. Virginia Hill had been dying since the moment Bugsy Siegel took his last breath. It just took her 19 years to finish. But Virginia and Bugsy's story, as tragic as it was, represents just one chapter in the long, bloody history of love and crime. To truly understand the depth of passion that could exist in the heart of darkness, we need to look at another couple, one whose love affair was perhaps even more dangerous, even more forbidden. Ava Gardner was never supposed to fall in love with a mobster. She was a movie star, a goddess on the silver screen, a woman who had everything Hollywood could offer. But in 1949, when she met Frank Costello at a party in New York, something shifted in the universe. Frank Costello was the prime minister of the underworld, the most politically connected mobster in America. He controlled judges, senators, even the mayor of New York. He was sophisticated, cultured, and utterly ruthless. And when he saw Ava Gardner across that crowded room, he wanted her the way he wanted everything else in his life, completely and without compromise. Their affair was one of the most closely guarded secrets in both Hollywood and the mob. They met in suites at the Waldorf Towers, in private dining rooms at the best restaurants in the city, in beach houses on Long Island where no one could see them. Frank treated Ava like a queen, showering her with gifts and attention, and a kind of respect she'd never gotten from the Hollywood men who saw her as nothing more than a beautiful object. "You're different," Frank told her one night as they lay in bed, the city lights twinkling through the window. "Most women, they want something from me. Money, protection, power. But you already have all that." Ava traced her finger along his jaw, feeling the roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow. "Maybe I just want you." "Nobody just wants me," Frank said, but his voice was gentle. "Everyone wants what I can give them. Then maybe I'm nobody." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her perfume. "You're not nobody. You're everything." But their love was doomed from the start. Frank was married to a woman he'd been with since they were teenagers, a woman who knew what he was and loved him anyway. Ava was married to various Hollywood leading men throughout the years, marriages that were more about publicity than passion. And both of them knew that their worlds could never truly merge. The mob wouldn't accept a movie star as the wife of one of their top men, and Hollywood would destroy Ava if her relationship with a known criminal became public. They stole what moments they could. Meetings that became increasingly risky as both the FBI and the Hollywood press began to suspect something was going on. J. Edgar Hoover himself became obsessed with catching Frank Costello in a compromising position, and Ava Gardner was just the kind of scandal he was looking for. One night, after they'd made love in a hotel room in Miami, Frank's phone rang. Ava watched as his face went hard, watched as the lover disappeared and the mob boss emerged. "I understand," he said into the phone, his voice cold. "It'll be taken care of." When he hung up, Ava asked, "What was that about?" "Business. Nothing you need to worry about." "Was someone going to be hurt?" She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. "Was someone going to be killed?" Frank looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "This is what I am, Ava. I'm not a movie star or a hero. I'm a criminal. I do things that would turn your stomach if you knew about them. If you can't handle that, then this thing between us needs to end now." Ava felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't want it to end." "Then don't ask questions you don't want answered." He pulled her back down beside him, his arms surprisingly gentle. "When you're with me, we're in our own world. What happens outside that world, that's separate. That's not us." But eventually, the outside world came crashing in. The Kefauver hearings in 1951 put organized crime in the national spotlight. Frank Costello was called to testify before Congress, and the whole country watched as he refused to answer questions, invoking the Fifth Amendment again and again. His hands, famous for their expressiveness, were all that the cameras showed, but everyone knew who he was. And everyone began to wonder who he was spending his time with. Ava ended the affair after the hearings, telling Frank it was too dangerous for both of them. They met one last time in a suite at the Plaza Hotel. "I love you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I can't do this anymore. I can't live in the shadows, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today's the day we get caught." Frank didn't argue. He simply nodded, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "I understand. I always knew this day would come." "Did you?" Ava wiped her eyes. "Because I didn't. I thought we could make it work somehow. I thought love would be enough." "Love is never enough," Frank said quietly. "Not in my world. In my world, love gets you killed." He kissed her one last time, a kiss that tasted of salt and regret, and then he walked out of her life forever. Ava Gardner went on to marry other men, to make more movies, to live the glamorous life everyone expected of her. But those who knew her said she was never the same after Frank Costello. Something had died in her the day she walked away from the only man who'd ever truly understood her. Frank Costello lived until 1973, surviving assassination attempts and government prosecutions and the constant churn of the mob's internal politics. But he never married again after his wife died, and those close to him said he kept a photograph of Ava Gardner in his wallet until the day he died. These stories of love and crime, of passion born in the shadows of violence, remind us that humanity exists even in the darkest places. Virginia Hill and Bugsy Siegel, Ava Gardner and Frank Costello. These were people who loved deeply and desperately, who reached for happiness even as they were drowning in a world of blood and betrayal. But perhaps the most tragic love story in Mafia history belongs to Albert Anastasia and his wife Elsa. Albert Anastasia was known as the Lord High Executioner, the head of Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. He was responsible for hundreds of deaths, maybe thousands. He was a man who killed without remorse, without hesitation, without mercy. And yet, with his wife Elsa, he was gentle. They met in the 1920s when Albert was still working as a longshoreman on the Brooklyn docks. Elsa was the daughter of a local shopkeeper, a quiet girl with dark eyes and a kind heart. She had no idea what Albert would become, no idea of the monster that lurked beneath his charming exterior. He courted her properly, bringing flowers to her father's shop, taking her to dinner and the movies, treating her with a respect that seemed at odds with his reputation on the docks. And when he asked her to marry him, she said yes, believing that she knew the real Albert, the man beneath the rough exterior. They married in 1928, and for the next 29 years, Elsa lived in a state of willful ignorance. She knew her husband was involved in criminal activities. She knew that men came to their house at all hours, that Albert left in the middle of the night and came back with blood on his clothes. But she never asked questions. She never demanded answers. She simply loved him, cooked his meals, raised their children, and pretended that they were a normal family. Albert, for his part, kept his two worlds rigidly separated. At home, he was a devoted husband and father. He helped his sons with their homework. He attended church every Sunday. He kissed his wife goodbye every morning and hello every night. But the moment he stepped out the door, he became someone else. The executioner. The man who could order a killing over breakfast and forget about it by lunch. "Don't you ever wonder?" her sister asked Elsa one day as they sat in her kitchen, drinking coffee. "Don't you wonder what he does out there? Who he hurts?" Elsa's hands shook as she set down her cup. "If I start wondering, I'll never stop. And then what? I leave him? Take the children and run? Where would we go that he couldn't find us? Who would protect us from the other men, the ones who see us as leverage against him? So you just live with it? You just accept it?" "I love him," Elsa said simply. "He's my husband, the father of my children. And yes, he does terrible things. But he's never done them to me. He's never raised his hand to me or the children. He provides for us. He loves us in his way." "That's not love," her sister said. "That's fear." "Maybe they're the same thing," Elsa replied. "Maybe in his world, you can't have one without the other." But Elsa's carefully constructed denial came crashing down on October 25, 1957. Albert Anastasia walked into the barber shop at the Park Sheraton Hotel for his regular appointment. He sat in the chair, a hot towel over his face, relaxing into the familiar ritual. And then two gunmen walked in and shot him 10 times, killing him instantly. Elsa identified his body at the morgue. She stood there, looking down at the man she'd loved for nearly 3 decades, and felt something inside her break. This was the reality she'd been hiding from. This was the truth she'd refused to see. Albert Anastasia had lived by violence, and he died by violence, and she'd enabled it all by refusing to ask questions. She buried him in a simple ceremony, and then she disappeared from public life. Her children changed their names, desperate to escape the legacy of their father's crimes. And Elsa lived for another 20 years in a small apartment in Brooklyn, a ghost haunting the neighborhood where she'd once been a bride. A journalist tracked her down in 1975, 2 years before her death. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Marrying him? Staying with him all those years?" Elsa looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Every single day," she said. "But I loved him. That's the terrible truth. I loved him, and I would probably do it all again, even knowing how it would end. Because for those moments when he was just Albert, just my husband, it was real. And those moments, as rare as they were worth everything else." These women, Virginia Hill, Ava Gardner, Elsa Anastasia, and countless others whose names have been lost to history, they loved men who lived in darkness. They made choices that destroyed them, that haunted them until their dying days. But they also experienced a kind of passion that most people never know, a love so intense it burned through every rational thought and left only raw emotion. Was it worth it? That's not for us to judge. Love, real love, doesn't calculate worth or measure consequences. It simply is. And in the world of organized crime, where death lurked around every corner and loyalty was a commodity to be bought and sold, love was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. Because love made you vulnerable. Love gave your enemies a target. Love meant you had something to lose, and in a world where everything could be taken away in an instant, having something to lose was the ultimate weakness. Yet they loved anyway. They loved desperately, completely, with every fiber of their being. They loved men who were monsters and angels, killers and protectors, criminals and providers. They loved, and that love destroyed them, but it also defined them. It gave meaning to lives that might otherwise have been nothing more than footnotes in someone else's story. The legacy of these historical mafia love affairs extends beyond the individuals involved. These stories shaped how we think about crime and punishment, about morality and choice, about the human capacity for both cruelty and tenderness. They remind us that nothing is ever simple, that people are never just one thing, that love can bloom even in the most unlikely places. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. Not that love conquers all, because clearly it doesn't. Virginia died alone in the snow. Ava lived with regret. Elsa buried the truth along with her husband. Love didn't save them. Love didn't redeem the men they loved. Love didn't change the fundamental reality of their situations. But love gave them moments of genuine human connection in a world built on lies and violence. It gave them something real to hold on to when everything else was shifting sand. It made them feel alive in a way that nothing else could. As we close this chapter on historical mafia love affairs, we're left with a question that has no easy answer. Were these women victims or accomplices? Were they trapped by circumstances or active participants in the violence that surrounded them? The truth, as always, is complicated. They were both and neither. They were human beings making impossible choices in impossible situations. They were women who loved unwisely and paid the price, but who also carved out spaces of genuine emotion in a world that valued emotion only as a tool for manipulation. Their stories endure because they speak to something universal in the human experience: the desire to be loved, the willingness to overlook flaws in the people we care about, the capacity for self-deception when the truth is too painful to face, and ultimately, the recognition that love, for all its power and beauty, cannot save us from the consequences of our choices or the choices of those we love. Virginia Hill, standing in that doorway watching Bugsy Siegel die, understood this in a way that most of us never will. She loved him. She always would. But love wasn't enough to stop the bullet, to change the ending, to rewrite the story they'd been telling since that first dance at the Waldorf Astoria. Love was simply the force that made the tragedy more profound, the loss more devastating, the regret more eternal. And in the end, isn't that what all great love stories are about? Not the happy endings, but the moments of connection that make the unhappy endings matter. Not the love that saves us, but the love that defines us, that marks us, that leaves scars we carry until we die. These historical mafia love affairs remind us that we are all capable of loving the wrong people for the right reasons, of making terrible choices in the name of passion, of seeing beauty in darkness and finding light in the most unexpected places. They remind us that love is not always good or pure or redemptive. Sometimes love is just love, messy and complicated and ultimately insufficient to overcome the weight of the world. But we love anyway. Just like Virginia and Bugsy, like Ava and Frank, like Elsa and Albert. We love anyway because to do otherwise would be to deny the very thing that makes us human. And in a world as dark and violent as the one these couples inhabited, holding on to that humanity, however flawed and compromised, was perhaps the bravest thing they could do.